The lights of the Reichstag no longer shone as they once did. The velvet curtains were drawn, and the air inside that palace felt aged, heavy with cigar smoke and the invisible tension that ruled Berlin in 1944. Outside, the distant thunder of Allied bombs echoed as a reminder that the empire, which had promised to last 1,000 years, was disintegrating in months. And within the cold corridors of power, one man prepared to commit the most dangerous act an officer could conceive: to defy Adolf Hitler. They called him Klaus von Stauffenberg, to some an idealistic aristocrat, to others a traitor, to himself simply a soldier who had seen too much. His eyes had witnessed the deserts of Africa, where the sun burned men and ideologies with equal indifference. He had watched comrades die of thirst, seen absurd orders carried out with blind devotion, and realized what many still refused to admit: the Führer was no longer a man, he was an abyss that devoured everything around him. That night, Stauffenberg walked alone through the Wolf's Lair headquarters. The sound of his footsteps on the concrete echoed like the ticking of an invisible clock, marking the seconds before destiny. The wind slipped through the cracks, carrying the metallic scent of cold and the distant murmur of engines that never stopped. He adjusted his eye patch, straightened the glove over his mutilated hand, and stared at the map spread across the table. Red lines cut through Europe like open wounds. In the center, Berlin. At the top, a single name seemed to dominate all others: Hitler. What few knew was that the general no longer slept peacefully. Within the walls of the chancellery, Hitler had begun to hear the sound of his own ruin. Radio messages brought only defeats. Generals returned with hollow faces. Civilians began to doubt. The Reich was collapsing not only on the battlefields but within the minds of men. And in that psychological void, that space between fear and faith, the plan was born. The conspirators did not meet in bright rooms. They gathered in the shadows, in discreet homes, silent offices, chapels where the candles trembled with fear of what was being confessed. Generals, diplomats, priests, all bound by an impossible idea: to kill the Führer, not out of revenge, but for redemption. It was the kind of decision that burns the soul. None of them saw themselves as heroes. They knew that if they failed, their families would be erased from existence. If they succeeded, history might still judge them as traitors. Yet they went on, because the alternative, living on one's knees before madness, was worse than death. As the summer of 1944 dragged on, the Eastern Front collapsed. Russia advanced like a living storm, and the Wehrmacht fought to hold back the inevitable. In Berlin, the people lived between propaganda and panic. Loudspeakers promised victory, but the skies screamed otherwise: sirens, ashes, children hiding in shelters while portraits of Hitler hung over the flames. The empire was dying, and few still believed it could be saved. Amid that chaos, Stauffenberg understood. Germany no longer needed a leader, it needed an end. On the morning of July 20th, the sky over East Prussia was clear. The air smelled of pine and gunpowder, and the sun illuminated the flags bearing the swastika as if exposing open wounds. Stauffenberg traveled to the Wolf's Lair carrying a leather briefcase that held the fate of a century. Inside, 2 blocks of British plastic explosive, a 10-minute detonator, and a belief that humanity could still be restored to a nation that had lost it. When he arrived, the hum of German planes above mixed with the metallic rhythm of officers' boots. Hitler was in good spirits. Reports from Italy spoke of stability. He greeted Stauffenberg with that fixed, cold stare that seemed to pierce bone. The colonel bowed, feeling sweat trace his spine. Everything he had done, every calculation, every secret meeting, every coded word, converged on that moment. The meeting began in a stifling room with open windows to ease the heat. Stauffenberg requested permission to step out briefly, under the pretext of reviewing documents. In the next room, he assembled the bomb with one hand, teeth clenched, heart pounding like a distant drum. The click of the detonator began the countdown. 10 minutes. He returned, placed the briefcase beneath the table, and said nothing. The murmur of officers' voices sounded like prayers to absent gods. When the internal clock struck the 9th minute, he quietly stepped out, pretending to take a call. and then came the roar. The ground shook as if hell itself had awakened. Glass shattered, smoke, screams, dust, chaos in an instant. Hitler's body was thrown back, the map ignited, and the room turned into a purgatory of splintered wood and fire. Stauffenberg ran. He jumped into the car, speeding down the dirt road, looking back only once. The column of smoke rising to the sky looked like a dark halo. He believed it. The Führer was dead, and for a few hours, the world exhaled. In Berlin, the conspirators acted. They seized buildings, arrested SS officers, and declared Operation Valkyrie. For the first time, the Reich wavered. Men hesitated before following orders. Radios fell silent. The entire system seemed suspended. But destiny, once again, revealed its cruel irony. Hitler had survived, wounded, but alive, and the nightmare resumed. When the Führer's voice echoed over the airwaves hours later, promising divine vengeance, the nation froze. The SS retaliated with the fury of a cornered beast. Arrests, interrogations, executions. Night fell over Berlin, and with it, the last breath of hope. Stauffenberg was captured in the courtyard of military headquarters. He did not beg, he did not flee. He simply looked up at the night sky, drew a deep breath, and spoke the words that would echo for eternity. Long live sacred Germany. The gunshot was quick, almost merciful. But what came after was quieter and more terrible. Hundreds of innocents were taken, families erased. Even the word Valkyrie became forbidden. The Reich tried to bury the memory of the general who had defied its iron god. But some truths are like seeds. They grow beneath the soil, nourished by the blood of the righteous. In the months that followed, the empire's collapse accelerated. Soviet troops crossed the Oder, the Allies reached the Rhine, and Berlin became a labyrinth of ruins. Hitler, now a ghost locked in his bunker, watched his dream dissolve in trembling hands. The man who believed he could command destiny now saw destiny itself watching him, cold and merciless. And perhaps, in some dark corner of his mind, he knew that the fall had begun not with bombs or tanks, but with the courage of one man who dared to say no. When the war ended and the world rose from the ashes and the tribunals, Claus von Stauffenberg's name was first erased, then restored, then debated. To some, a traitor, to others, a martyr. But the truth, whispered among the ruins, ran deeper. He had not tried merely to kill a man. He had tried to kill an idea, that blind obedience is virtue, that fear is patriotism, that duty outweighs conscience. And though he lost that battle in life, he won it in time. Decades later, in forgotten archives, letters were found, never sent. Written to his wife, they spoke not of glory, but of guilt, of doubt. He knew that history is a cruel mistress, never loyal to those who defy her. Yet he faced the abyss nonetheless, because there are moments when survival itself becomes cowardice, and to die is the last act of freedom. Today, when one walks through the silent squares of Berlin, the wind still carries fragments of voices, the faint echo of footsteps, the rustling of leaves over cold stone. The city has risen again, but in its heart, an ancient echo remains, that of a man in a perfect uniform, a leather briefcase in his hand, and the weight of the world on his shoulders. He knew he would not win, and still, he tried, because sometimes, true victory does not lie in destroying the tyrant, but in proving that he can be defied. And in the end, when the fires died and silence fell over Europe, the name Claus von Stauffenberg was no longer just that of a conspirator. It became the symbol of a rare moment, when human conscience, even surrounded by absolute darkness, still found the courage to rise and say, enough. And as history continues to turn, filled with new empires, new leaders, new lies, there is something in the eyes of every man that recalls Stauffenberg, the memory that every absolute power carries from its birth, the seed of its own destruction. The truth about the general who defied Hitler lies not in his bomb, his failure, or his death, but in what he proved to the world. That even in the heart of the Reich, where fear was law and obedience was faith, there was still room for the impossible dignity. And that is why, as long as tyrants exist, the sound of that explosion will continue to echo, unseen, through the basements of history, not as the noise of destruction, but as the eternal whisper of the human conscience.